Hi, I'm Don from DonDronesOn. On Sunday, September the 1st, I had what's called a flyaway with my Mavic 2 Pro drone. Now, for those of you who aren't flying drones all the time, a flyaway is when there's something that goes wrong with your flight such that your drone, well, basically takes on a life of its own. So in my case, it took off from basically nothing to over 90 kilometers per hour. And, well, we'll see what happened in a few minutes. So it started off perfectly fine flight, took off from my dock, I went out just a few feet, started adjusting my camera, and that's the first clue that something was weird. Have a look at the horizon. See how it's kind of tilting back and forth? That is not normal. Look at that. I mean, that's like 5 or 10 degrees off. And while it was doing that, the whole drone was, instead of sitting there stock still, which it normally would, it was drifting ever so slowly from the middle towards the right. And I, adjusted it and brought it back. Didn't think too much about it because I noticed I had 11 GPS satellites, which is a little low, should be perfectly fine, but I typically get 16 or 17, so a little strange. Now you can see the day itself was beautiful. It was about 21 degrees Celsius, almost no wind, but just you can see the water's just kind of rippling a bit. I think maybe 10 to 15 kilometer per hour wind. Nothing crazy going on. So it was a great day for a flight. And what I wanted to do was a hyperlapse. So a hyperlapse is when you're doing a time lapse and you're kind of moving along with the drone as you fly. So I'll break to the point that happens, and we'll or when I start up that hyperlapse, and you can see what happens at that point. So here's the hyperlapse footage. There's only about 10 seconds. The hyperlapse was with a 2-second interval between photos, so it wasn't very long. It looks beautiful at the beginning, and then you'll see that things go crazy. I'll leave it in a loop just so we can see it a couple of times. So here's the normal part. And then I've slowed it down a bit so you can see what happens. The whole gimbal flips over to about 25 degrees when the acceleration takes off. So what happened, I'm going 0.3 meters per second during the regular part of this hyperlapse, like this part. So really, really slow. And then it accelerates all on its own. And when I looked at the log, and we'll look at that in a second, my joystick controls don't do anything. They're just still, and it goes into an acceleration mode. All right, here's the log viewer called Phantom Help. You can see the map here. This is North Beaver Lake, this kind of dark area, South Beaver Lake, and I'm launching from this strange little peninsula that divides the two lakes up. Those of you who have watched my Truck in the Lake video from last winter, that truck went into the ice right about there between this point here and this point here. There's a water path between those 2 points called the Narrows, right where it says Beaver Lake. And over here on the log, you can see the positions of my 2 joysticks and the orientation of the drone. Down here is a 1/10 of a second per row log with all the details, including the altitude above my launch height. I launched basically at water level plus a foot since I launched from my dock, and you can see my horizontal speed here. So let's move along. You can see first of all I kind of set out along there and just did some general flying around. And then right here is where I started that hyperlapse. And you can see at this point I've picked up more satellites, so I'm now at 16 satellites. I'm 35 feet above my takeoff position, and my speed, my horizontal speed is between a half a mile per hour and 1 mile per hour. So as I go along, this is where I'm doing my hyperlapse here, and you can see that I'm staying about the same altitude, trying to keep my speed about the same as I go along. And you can see my joysticks are I'm just moving the drone sideways. I'm pointing in this towards this shoreline. You can recall there were two guys in a boat in this little cove over here. But here's the first clue that something might be going wrong. Look at the orientation of the drone. It's pointing in the opposite direction. If I go back just a little bit, see, as I'm going along here, it's pointing correctly. But at this point right here, it flips around the other way. I don't remember it seeing that happen. In fact, I'm pretty sure I could still see the opposite shore, the far shore from where I launched. But here I go now. About this spot, around 12 minutes and 8 or 9 seconds, you can see the speed starting to pick up. 3 mile per hour, 4.5 mile per hour. Nothing too exciting. 12, 13. So let's take this as a 0 point. 12 minutes and 10 seconds might be where this problem occurred. You can still see the log system knows that I have joystick control at this point because it's still indicating a little bit of joystick action happening there. But I'm now going 13 miles per hour at 12 minutes and 10 seconds. Let's move 1 or 2 seconds further along. Now I'm at 13 seconds. So 3 seconds later, I'm now going 18.6 miles per hour, and my joysticks are now apparently in the middle. In other words, I shouldn't be moving at all. I think somewhere in that zone is where something went wrong. And as we go another few seconds along, here we are at 16 seconds. I'm now going 56 miles per hour, 57 miles per hour at 16.5 seconds. So that equates to over 90 kilometers per hour. And I'm still doing that. There was 58 going by. And then around this point, it starts to slow down a little bit, and you can still see the drone is pointing towards Neville Point, this piece of land here. And I get this message here that says high wind velocity. There was no wind, there was no gust, nothing. This wind velocity is me rushing through the air. And then around here, 12 minutes and 29 seconds, if I recall correctly. Here. At 12 minutes, 29 seconds, the flight mode says go home. Aircraft is returning to the home point. I did not do anything at this point. So it thinks it's returning home. And as you can see from the path, it continues on. Here's home. It's going in the opposite direction for quite some time. And the reason I'm quite confident that it wasn't going home at this point is I distinctly remember seeing, and you can see it as it continues along this path, see how it goes here. I distinctly remember seeing in the camera view the narrows between Neville Point and Richmond Point over here. And I remember it turning around, as you can see right here. And it was shortly after that I hit the return to home button on the controller. My joysticks were doing nothing. Nothing I would do on any controls was activating anything in any way, shape, or form. Just to try it, I hit the return to home button on the controller. And I think that's when it kicked in somewhere around here, because you can see the altitude. Remember, it was about 35 before. It's starting to go up, and it gradually goes up to its return to home altitude, which is 40 meters or about 120 feet. And you can see it does that right about here. It actually overshoots, perhaps. Well, maybe my math is wrong. So around where it kind of ends is where I think it's finally figured out that it should be returning to home. Now, I'll mention this at this point. During this whole thing, this is only, what is this now, 12 minutes and 47 seconds, so about 30 seconds from the point that it lost control to the point that I figured out, oh, I should hit the return to home button. That's 30 seconds. Around here is where, I started to realize that something was actually going wrong, like seriously wrong. To be honest, I wasn't too worried about the safety situation here in terms of people on the ground or anything. I was in the middle of the lake. There were no boats down here. There was that one boat in the cove in this area here. There's very few houses or cottages in this area here. There is a cottage here, Deb and Marty's cottage, on this piece of land here, and there's a couple more. There's no airports. The closest airport is 15 nautical miles away from me, and that's over in this direction over here. So I wasn't too worried about safety of people on the ground. There was no risk there. I was really only worried about my drone being so low over the water and heading towards the trees at the end of the lake here. And if they didn't hit the trees, this is there's a pretty high ridge of land up here. It would have blasted itself to smithereens, and this is very dense brush up in this area here. So here I am. It finally kicked in the return to home. But if that's the case, I'd like to know, if we zoom in here a little bit, you can see that it didn't exactly return home. It kept on wandering around and headed out into the lake. But somewhere around here, you can see that suddenly I have joystick control again, and I take control of the drone and take it back and land. So there we go. I'll tell you, that was really scary. To be right in there, even though it was only 30 seconds long, to hear the drone going flying down the lake at high speed, to experience it with the Moverio glasses, seeing the landscape swirl around you, it was a pretty scary experience. So thankfully it ended up well. As a lessons learned, something to consider here is that every one of us droners needs to be prepared to do some drastic action in case your drone goes out of control. If that return to home had not worked, I might have had to consider ditching the craft with the crossed joysticks. Not that the joysticks were obeying any commands, so who knows what might have happened. If this had been in a populated area or near an airport, this would have been potentially a serious situation, and a perfect environment where that emergency button on the Drone Pilot Canada app, which tells you with one button press all the nearby airports and allows you to instantly phone any of them with one button press, would have been a fabulous feature to have to possibly save the day, at least from a safety perspective. So with that, I'll stop. It's making me sweat just reliving this. So I'd like to hear about your experiences with flyaways. I hope you haven't had any, but if you have, share them in the comments below. Thank you again. Like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.